Revolution. This word often sounds like a promise of fairness, like a cleansing fire against cruel rulers. But sometimes it turns into something far worse, a darkness that destroys not just governments, but the very soul of humanity itself. In October of 1793, as Paris was still covered with the blood of the rich nobles, a woman sat in a wet cell inside the Conciergerie prison, a place grimly known as the waiting room of death. Her name was Marie Antoinette. Once the Queen of France, now just prisoner number 280. Every title, every bit of respect, every protection her crown once gave her had been brutally taken away. History remembers her execution, the guillotine that ended her life on the 16th of October. But the chilling truth is Marie Antoinette died long before that blade fell slowly, piece by agonizing piece, in a cell that became the stage for her methodical destruction. What truly happened in those 76 days between her arrival at the Conciergerie on the 2nd of August and her final walk to the scaffold? The answer isn't found in revolutionary speeches or patriotic announcements, but in the fragile letters of the guards, the quiet diaries of witnesses, and the archives France kept sealed. For over 2 centuries, this is not a story of a queen bravely accepting her fate. This is the documented story of systematic humiliation, psychological torture, and widespread degradation disguised as revolutionary justice. Marie Antoinette was not merely executed, she was erased. Her very humanity was systematically taken apart before her body ever reached the guillotine. Imagine being the most powerful woman in Europe. Palaces sprawled beneath your feet, kings bowed in your presence, and entire nations moved at your command. Then in a single violent moment, everything is ripped away. Not just your crown and your wealth, but your children, your freedom, your very name, and finally your most basic human dignity. This was Marie Antoinette's fate. And the revolutionaries of Paris knew precisely how to plan every phase of this descent, ensuring maximum suffering. On the 2nd of August 1793, Marie Antoinette was transferred from her relatively comfortable prison in the Temple Tower to the notorious Conciergerie. Officially, the reason given was security following the discovery of a failed royalist escape attempt. But the truth was far more political, far more cruel. The revolutionaries needed a public spectacle, and for that, they had to transform Marie Antoinette into something the people could hate, not pity. The Temple Tower with its privacy allowed her too much dignity, too much humanity. The Conciergerie would correct these errors. This medieval fortress on the Seine was no ordinary prison. Dark, damp, and infested with rats, it was infamous as the last stop before the guillotine. Hundreds had passed through its cells, never to return. The cell prepared for Marie Antoinette bore the number 12. It measured barely 3 square meters. Its walls were black with mold. The stone floor was constantly cold, constantly soaked by the wetness rising from the Seine flowing beneath the building. A narrow iron bed, a fragile wooden chair, a chamber pot, and a single flickering candle formed her entire world. The window was barred, placed so high she could never look out, allowing only a weak shaft of light to tell her whether it was day or night. Yet these physical conditions were only the beginning. The revolutionaries understood that true degradation came not merely from discomfort, but from the systematic destruction of privacy, of dignity, and of control over one's own body. Marie Antoinette was placed under 24-hour surveillance, not by discreet guards, but by 2 armed revolutionary guards who lived and slept within her tiny cell. According to the records of the Conciergerie's director, Francois Bolt, these guards were instructed to document her every movement, every breath, every gesture, every moment of her day and night. She could not wash, could not change her clothes, could not even attend to her most personal bodily needs without their eyes fixed upon her. Chronicles from that time speak of a desperate's attempts to beg for a curtain or a partition. Every plea was coldly refused. The official reason was security, but the true reason, of course, was deliberate humiliation. Imagine the psychological torment of never being alone, never having a single moment of privacy, always watched, always judged, always displayed like an animal in a cage. Marie Antoinette, who had once lived in sprawling palaces with hundreds of servants awaiting her every whisper, could now not even perform her most basic physical functions without an audience. This was no mere precaution. It was a calculated strategy to break her psychological strength before her trial had even begun. The revolutionaries understood that a broken woman on the scaffold was far more impactful than a dignified queen. That people needed to see her humiliated, defeated, human, and utterly pathetic. The indignities were not limited to constant surveillance. Marie Antoinette's health rapidly got worse in the damp, mold-ridden cell. She suffered from chronic bleeding, worsened by the immense stress and the appalling conditions, most likely advanced uterine cancer, though she never received any adequate medical attention. Her linen required regular changing, but even this became an instrument of systematic degradation. According to the memoirs of Rosalie Lamorlier, one of the few female attendants allowed to care for Marie Antoinette, all changes of clothing, what had to take place in the presence of the male guards. The queen was forced to remove and clean her blood-stained undergarments before strange men. Rosalie describes in her memoirs how Marie Antoinette tried to maintain some sense of dignity, changing in a corner of the cell, her back turned to the guards, yet even this small concession was sometimes denied. On several occasions, the guards demanded that she undress fully before them, supposedly to ensure she carried no hidden weapons or escape plans. This was not a security check. It was sexualized violence thinly veiled as revolutionary duty. The guards would comment on her body, laugh at her condition, and treat the former Queen of France with a contempt reserved for a common criminal. Each degradation was documented, not as a scandal, but as proof of revolutionary control and the absolute power they wielded over her. The systematic dehumanization continued. Marie Antoinette's hair, once her pride, carefully styled and powdered according to the fashions of Versailles, was now unkempt, streaked with gray, and falling out in clumps, a cruel combination of stress, malnutrition, and illness. She lost weight rapidly, her face becoming hollow, her skin pale and almost translucent. The revolutionary newspapers published cruel caricatures depicting her as an ugly, depraved witch, a grotesque distortion that ignored the stark reality of a dying, suffering woman. The intent was clear. The French people were not to see Marie Antoinette as a human being who was suffering, but as a monstrous embodiment of evil who deserved every ounce of punishment. The most heinous degradation arrived during her trial, which started on the 14th of October, 1793. This was no true legal proceeding. It was a carefully staged spectacle, the verdict predetermined long before the first word was uttered. Marie Antoinette faced not only charges of conspiring against the revolution, but also, shockingly, of sexually abusing her own son, the 8-year-old Louis Charles. This accusation, completely made up and based solely on a confession extracted from the terrified child who had been brutalized by his captors, was so grotesque, so utterly inhuman, that even some revolutionaries within the courtroom hesitated. Yet it was publicly presented, read aloud before a guillotine, bloodthirsty crowd conditioned to view Marie Antoinette as the ultimate embodiment of evil. Imagine being a mother, forcibly separated from your children, imprisoned in a damp cell, dying from a disease that consumed your body from within, and then standing before a room full of people accusing you of the most horrible crime a mother could commit. In that moment, however, Marie Antoinette's response offered one of the few instances where her old dignity, her queenly resolve, blazed through. She turned to the women in the audience, her voice cutting through the noise, and simply asked, "I appeal to all mothers here. Is such an accusation even possible?" For a fleeting, fragile moment, a profound silence descended upon the courtroom. The machinery of the revolution, however, tolerated no such moments of humanity for its enemies. The silence was quickly, violently broken, after a 2-day show trial, during which Marie Antoinette was interrogated for over 16 grueling hours without pause. Suffering from exhaustion, hunger, and persistent blood loss, she was condemned to death by the guillotine. The verdict surprised no one. Yet the manner in which it was to be carried out contained one final, calculated humiliation. Unlike her husband, Louis XVI, who had been transported to the guillotine in an enclosed carriage, Marie Antoinette was forced to ride on an open cart through the crowded streets of Paris. This allowed the jeering crowds to see her, to mock her, to spit upon her. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back like a common criminal, not a former head of state. Her once magnificent hair was brutally cut short. Her dress was a simple, coarse white gown, already soaked with her own blood and sweat. On the morning of the 16th of October, 1793, Marie Antoinette began her last journey. Eyewitness accounts describe a woman barely recognizable as the beautiful, radiant queen who had once enchanted all of Europe. Her face was sunken, her eyes hollow and distant, her body stooped with pain and exhaustion. Yet, even in this state, she attempted to preserve a final shred of dignity. She held her head high, refusing to meet the gaze of the hostile mob, and walked with steady, quiet steps up the stairs of the scaffold that she accidentally stepped upon. The foot of the executioner, Charles Henry Sanson, her last recorded words were spoken. "Pardon me, monsieur, I did not do it on purpose." Politeness to the very end. A final poignant act of humanity in a world that had stripped her of every vestige of it. The blade fell precisely at 12 o'clock noon. Marie Antoinette's head was presented to the roaring crowd. Her body was unceremoniously thrown into an unmarked grave alongside dozens of other victims of the guillotine. But the story of her suffering did not end with her death. For over 2 centuries, the complete and utterly devastating details of her humiliation in the conciergerie remained sealed within French national archives. deemed too shameful, too cruel, too inhumane to ever be made public. It wasn't until 1989, with the 200th anniversary celebration of the French Revolution, that historians began to release the full records. These included the previously suppressed memoirs of Rosalie Lamorlière, the stark, unsettling diaries of the Guards, and the official, chilling reports of the Concierge's director. What these documents reveal is truly harrowing. Marie Antoinette's suffering in the Conciergerie was not merely an unfortunate, unintended consequence of revolutionary justice. It was a systematic, carefully calculated campaign of psychological and, yes, sexual torture. It was engineered, with a singular cruel purpose, to transform a powerful woman into a pitiable object, something the French populace could despise without the slightest twinge of conscience. The revolutionaries understood with an intuitive cruelty what modern psych now call systematic If you intend to convince people to commit truly horrible acts, you must first strip the victim of their humanity. Marie Antoinette was dehumanized not only through relentless propaganda, but through every single moment of her 76 days of captivity. Every forced act of exposure, every refusal of basic dignity, was a deliberate step in this calculated erasure. The question remains, why? Why was the swift, decisive blade of the guillotine not sufficient? Why did Marie Antoinette have to be psychologically destroyed before her body was physically destroyed? The answer lies deep within the very nature of revolutionary justice itself. The French Revolution grandly proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity. Yet its leaders knew that true power resides not just in killing enemies, but in utterly degrading them, in breaking them, in transforming them into examples so terrifying that they silence all dissent. Marie Antoinette was not merely a queen. She was a powerful symbol, and symbols, they believed, had to be completely obliterated not just physically, but in every conceivable aspect of their very being. Her systematic humiliation was a stark, brutal message sent to every aristocrat, every single enemy of the revolution. This is what happens to those who dare to oppose us. Not merely death, but absolute, crushing destruction today. The Conciergerie prison still stands on the banks of the Seine, a museum and monument to the French Revolution. Thousands of visitors walk through its reconstructed cell number 12 each year, reading the sanitized descriptions of Marie Antoinette's final days. But the complete truth, the unvarnished and brutal reality, is rarely told within those walls. The systematic sexual degradation, the forced exposure, the relentless psychological torture that was so casually rationalized as a revolutionary necessity. These intimate details remain deeply uncomfortable, too dark for glossy tourist brochures, too grim for national myths built on ideals of justice and liberty. Yet the very stones remember. The cold, constantly damp walls of cell number 12 saw everything, heard everything, every whispered tear, every desperate, ragged breath, every single moment of her calculated humiliation. Marie Antoinette did not just die on the 16th of October, 1793. She died every single day, every single moment of her 76 days in the Conciergerie. She died piece by agonizing piece until there was nothing left but a broken body carefully prepared for the blade. The guillotine, in its horrifying swiftness, was merciful compared to what came before. Death for Marie Antoinette was a grim salvation, not a punishment. The true punishment was the life she was forced to endure in that tiny, suffocating cell, exposed and utterly erased long before her heart finally ceased to beat. What do you think of her story? How should history remember such acts of systematic cruelty done in the name of supposed justice? The past is not always clean, nor is it often simple. It's a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and terror, of noble ideals and shocking brutality. When we choose to ignore the darker threads, we risk forgetting the full picture, losing the lessons embedded in the shadows here. We bring to light the stories history has tried to bury. The archives of power still hold countless secrets, and every story we uncover, every silenced voice we amplify, is an act of justice for those who are forgotten. The cell still stands. The stones still remember, and now you remember too. Question everything you have been told about revolutions, about justice, and about the basic nature of power. The truth, in all its raw, unfiltered brutality, is always darker, infinitely more complex, and profoundly more human than the official narratives would ever have us believe. It challenges our comfortable assumptions, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the capacity for cruelty, even in pursuit of what is deemed righteous. The legacy of Marie Antoinette's final days serves as a stark reminder that even in the pursuit of liberation, the line between justice and vengeance can blur, transforming even the most noble aspirations into a vehicle for systematic soul-crushing oppression. It is a cautionary tale, etched in the cold stone of the Conciergerie, whispering of the dangers inherent when humanity is stripped away one calculated moment at a time. This is not just history. It is a mirror reflecting the potential for darkness that resides within us all.